A historic NASCAR weekend comes to a close with a triple header of action at Pocono Raceway. All three NASCAR National Touring Series raced today at the Tricky Triangle. Three very different races, three, I would say, pretty entertaining races, and it all came down to, once again, a battle between Pocono King Denny Hamlin and Kevin Harvick for the victory. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric, and welcome to Out of the Groove. Super busy day of NASCAR racing today. I'm here to review the NASCAR Cup Series race at Pocono, the second race of this doubleheader weekend. We're going to talk about the race. I'm going to talk about the top finishers. I'm going to put this thing on the groovy gauge at the end. Before I do talk about the Cup race, though, I am going to briefly hit on the Trucks and Xfinity race. The Truck race, I'll be completely honest, I didn't get up early enough to watch most of. It started at like 8:30 in the morning my time because it was rained out from yesterday morning. I saw the second half of it. Great for Brandon Jones getting the win. His first ever Truck win, despite the fact that I think he has 2 Xfinity wins already, so good for him. Then, of course, on lap 1 of the Xfinity race, Brandon Jones got junked. The Xfinity race was really fun. I did a brief live stream during the rain delay earlier this afternoon, but in that live stream, I talked about how that Pocono Xfinity race today was probably the best you can get at Pocono Raceway. A lot of great action, a little messy at times for sure, but you had a great battle for the win at the end between Ross Chastain and Chase Briscoe. Ultimately, it was Briscoe who has stood out to me this year as the clear Xfinity driver to beat every single week. I've been a little hard on some of the Xfinity Series field this year. I mean, there's some drivers that have impressed me, sure. Harrison Burton's already got 2 wins. That's impressive. Noah Gragson, who we had on the show last week, has stepped up big time this year. He also already has a couple of wins. But overall, I would say there's only maybe 2 drivers in the Xfinity Series that I think are capable of going into the Cup Series and being competitive. And that's Chase Briscoe and Ross Chastain. Lo and behold, those are the 2 drivers duking it out for the win at the end of this afternoon's race. So overall, good Xfinity race, good truck race from what I did see. A lot of wrecks and carnage on that one as well. So maybe a little messy of a Trucks and Xfinity race. And I will say the Cup race today was a bit messier than yesterday's race as well. Yesterday's race saw a lot of long green flag runs, very few cautions for incident, pretty typical for Pocono. Usually you don't see a whole lot of wrecks, a whole lot of spins, but today's race, especially the first half, the first 2 stages, lots of wrecks. I just can't believe that today was yet another example of a NASCAR Cup Series race being affected by rain. Cars were literally on the track doing pace laps when a 30-minute lightning delay came into effect. Then NASCAR actually got a couple laps in before rain hit the racetrack. Not a whole lot of rain, but once again, rain threatened and forced about a 1-hour red flag. I was looking during this red flag. This was the 15th race of the Cup Series season. I believe 9 races. Now, I could be off by one or the other. This is just based on my count, my recollection. I remember some races like Auto Club, which I did not count as a rain delay, but I do believe that race was delayed about 10 minutes due to some weather. I remember being at that race and they actually put the car covers on for a few minutes before they eventually took them off when the rain kind of passed. So I'm not really counting that one. So I think roughly 9 of the 15 races this year have been delayed or affected in some way, shape, or form by weather. Not to mention, of those 15 races, 3 have been postponed a full day. Obviously, the Daytona 500, Talladega this past weekend, and then I think it was Charlotte, the second Charlotte race a couple weeks back. 3 postponements in the first 15 races. That is unheard of. NASCAR's luck, I should say Fox's luck, because they're the ones who have to handle all that dead air. Their luck this season has been non-existent, I must say. It's been a rough year for weather, but I'm not going to dwell on that today. Ultimately, we did see a full Pocono race, 140 laps, a little bit shorter than what we're used to seeing. A typical 400-mile Pocono race is about 160 laps. Yesterday's race was 130, today's race was 140 laps. I will say I think the slightly shorter distance worked very well for Pocono. That was one of the selling points when last year NASCAR introduced the idea of a Pocono doubleheader. A lot of people, myself included, were kind of groaning about it. 2 Poconos in one weekend. Luckily, NASCAR decided to shorten the distance of both races, so they're both in the mid-300s, kind of like a typical Xfinity race distance, you might say, so keeping the races under 3 hours, or at least right around 3 hours. I think that made a huge difference both in yesterday's race, especially in yesterday's race, as well as in today's race. I don't think every race needs to have their distances shortened or anything like that, but I do think a lot of the bigger kind of intermediate tracks, Pocono I know is a 2.5 miler, but it kind of races like an intermediate track. A lot of those races, especially ones like Pocono that have 2 races a year, should have, I think, some of their, if not all of their race dates shortened just a little bit. Instead of 400 or 500 miles, maybe get in the 300 range. I thought today's distance was pretty perfect. Anyway, I'll talk more about the race as a whole in a few minutes, but now let's look at the top finishers, because for the second day in a row, top two on the running order did not change. Yesterday, it was Kevin Harvick edging out Denny Hamlin to get his first Pocono win of his career. Today, it's Denny Hamlin using some pit strategy at the end, perhaps, to seal the deal and get his record-tying 6th victory at Pocono. Remember Denny Hamlin? He was the guy in 2005 as a rookie, came out and swept both Poconos that year. He has always been strong at Pocono. Doesn't matter the car, the rules package. I mean, that was the Gen 4 15 years ago. We've had 2 generations of cars since then, several variations in between, and he's still winning races and, finished 1-2 both races this weekend. Denny Hamlin loves Pocono. He is the king of Pocono, and once again made that known here today. That's his 4th win of the season just overall. So Denny Hamlin has emerged right now as the championship frontrunner, in my opinion. Denny Hamlin is still searching for his first championship, and I will say there have been a couple times in his career where I would say he has looked like the championship frontrunner, maybe even last year perhaps. He had a lot of momentum going into Homestead at the end of last year, but in each of those cases, Denny Hamlin has come up short. This year, though, with 4 wins, setting himself apart from the rest of the field, clearly the most dominant driver at Joe Gibbs Racing right now, the most consistent without a doubt. Definitely gives a lot of Denny Hamlin fans something to be excited for come November. Of course, the championship this year is at Phoenix Raceway, a track that Denny Hamlin has historically been pretty good at. He actually won at Phoenix last November, so definitely something to keep an eye on. Denny Hamlin looking very good so far the first half of this season. Kevin Harvick once again very fast. Pit strategy kind of came into play at the end of this race. There were a lot of cautions in the first half of the race, but stage 3 pretty much went uninterrupted, which led to green flag stops, varying strategies perhaps. What it really came down to was that in the closing laps, Hamlin was able to maneuver lap traffic better than Kevin Harvick was. Even on slightly older tires, Kevin Harvick was not able to eat into Denny Hamlin's lead very much, maybe a couple of seconds overall. And so therefore, Hamlin had a big enough cushion to make his final actual 2-tire stop and still come out with a slim lead, and with the fresher tires at that point, Hamlin drove off. But Kevin Harvick, another very solid day. Erik Jones, I'll give him a shout out. He was my pick to win this race, gets a strong 3rd place finish, never really had anything for the leaders, but he also never got the track position. If we'd seen Erik Jones with clean air at some point in this race, I'm sure he likely would have driven away. Clean air, of course, is extremely important, but I think Erik Jones had a top 3 car pretty much all day long. Good to see him get a good result after getting taken out in kind of just a wacky wreck yesterday. The Chevys were awful yesterday. There were no Chevys in the top 10 yesterday. Today, Chase Elliott leads the way with a 4th place finish. Not too bad. Still not a whole lot of Chevys near the top of this running order at the end of the day, but at least an improvement. I will say that. I expected something from the Hendrick cars, and Chase Elliott showed a little bit of that today. A good day for the Erics. Eric Almirola, 5th place. That is 4 straight top 5 finishes for Eric Almirola in the last 4 races overall. He finished 3rd yesterday, 5th today. Eric Almirola is on a roll. We've talked about it. He is in a contract year. I think he's likely going to stay with Stewart-Haas Racing because I think Smithfield is going to continue to support him. They've been a huge supporter of Almirola for many years. But results like this, top 5, 4 in a row, is going to show that he actually earns and he actually deserves that ride. Because up to this point, last year was a bit of a disappointment. This year, a bit of a slow start. Last couple weeks, been fantastic, so keep them coming. Matt DiBenedetto, a very solid run. Then you got some more Hendrick cars, William Byron, another SHR car, Clint Boyer as well. Brad Keselowski ends up 11th. He was likely going to end up with the top 5, but they had to pit with just a few laps to go. Maybe a miscalculation, perhaps didn't get it entirely full in their last stop. Either way, that cost him a few stops. You got the Ganassi guys just finishing outside the top 10. Another okay day for them. The Chevys, again, Chevys a little bit better than yesterday. Most of the Chevys yesterday were outside the top 15. Today, a lot of them in the top 15, a few even in the top 10. So an improvement for Chevrolet, without a doubt. Bit of a disappointing day for Jimmie Johnson. Kind of just a bad weekend overall in terms of execution for that 48 team. Remember yesterday, they got into trouble, got a little bit of damage when during green flag pit stops, they ran into literally the only other car on pit road. It was just a miscommunication issue there that cost them yesterday. And then today's race, some more issues on pit road. Front tire carrier wasn't able to get all the way around the car before Johnson sped off, and he made contact with the tire, ended up being equipment out of the box, so a penalty late cost Jimmie Johnson a possible top 10 finish. They rallied to get 16th. Not awful, but certainly a disappointing weekend for Jimmie Johnson, I'm sure. His last visit to Pocono, likely not going to be one to remember. Now, unlike yesterday's race, which was mostly incident-free, you had the wreck between Reddick and Erik Jones, a couple spins here, and there's some tire issues late affecting Bowman and some other drivers, but beyond those, a few outlying examples, you didn't really have a whole lot of incidents in yesterday's race. Today's race, especially the first half, saw some surprising wrecks. Christopher Bell, who had a strong top 5 yesterday, got sideways. His car was absolutely junked. Michael McDowell, who had a great top 10 yesterday, got into the outside wall after it looked like Chase Elliott gave him a huge shove down the straightaway. Maybe he didn't line it up just right. McDowell was frustrated with Chase Elliott afterwards. Chase Elliott didn't seem to think he did anything too wrong, but ultimately that damage led to McDowell cutting a tire down. Huge damage on the 34 car. Also, Chris Buescher on a restart got sideways. He wrecked, big damage for the 17. He also had a top 10 yesterday, so rough Sunday for those two race teams. But the biggest and probably the most surprising and definitely the most controversial incident of the day happened to Kyle Busch off the front end of Ryan Blaney. Defending champion Kyle Busch, who has had a lot of great Pocono success in recent years, found himself head-on into the inside safer barrier after contact with Ryan Blaney trying to go around Garrett Smithley, a lapped car. Now, Fox did not have a good angle of how this whole wreck started. They had a virtual look at it, and in the virtual look, you could see Ryan Blaney's car literally inside of Kyle Busch's car partially. The right front and the left rear of the two cars came together, but for a while there, Fox did not have a definite view of what happened. Kyle Busch was clearly frustrated after the wreck, took a while to get out of his car, tossed his gloves out, very nonchalantly, very frustrated. Kyle Busch often wears his emotions on his sleeve, did so definitely in this case. And in his post-race interview, or his infield care center interview, Kyle Busch really didn't want to talk about the wreck. He just didn't want to talk about it, just seemed kind of miffed about the whole issue, didn't want to even mention it, so that left fans to speculate. Now, later in the race, Fox was able to go to a third party and get some footage of the wreck, so we now do have a video of how the wreck started, and it's still kind of inconclusive. I mean, clearly, when you look at that, Ryan Blaney ran right through Kyle Busch's left rear, and that's what sent him around, but you can tell Kyle Busch trying to pass Garrett Smithley. It's difficult to see where they're at on the racetrack. It's difficult to say how much Kyle Busch checked up, how suddenly he might have checked up, because it does appear like he slowed down a little bit to try and go to the inside of Garrett Smithley, and Blaney probably had time to slow down as well. It looked like Blaney did not lift much, if at all. And so I do say Blaney perhaps not paying attention there, maybe a miscommunication, maybe just a weird situation. I definitely put most of that on Blaney, but it was clearly an accident. I don't think there was any bad intentions behind that. In the Xfinity race day, we saw some retaliations on track. This wasn't one of those types of cases. But still, shocking to see Kyle Busch, who is still winless this season, going head on into the wall at Pocono, one of his better racetracks. He was likely on track for a top 5 finish today. Seemed to have good speed until that instant. Just a kind of weird spot on the track, maybe similar to what happened to Reddick and Eric Jones in yesterday's race when they ran up on a slower car and got stacked up. Likely the same deal here. Again, that camera angle doesn't really tell us the full story, but clear that Blaney and Busch got into each other, and Kyle Busch wasn't too happy about it. Now, was NASCAR's experimental doubleheader weekend here at Pocono, was this a success? Honestly, it's tough to say, and it's tough to say because I believe when NASCAR initially announced the doubleheader at Pocono, they did so with the fan experience at the racetrack 100% in mind. I mentioned this in yesterday's show, but there was a report several months ago that ticket sales for the Pocono doubleheader weekend were way up compared to individual races last weekend. The grandstands were expected to be full for the two races this weekend. The idea of 2 cup races, as well as Trucks, Xfinity, and even ARCA, the same weekend was definitely alluring to many fans in the Pocono Raceway area. The idea was to turn this weekend into just a huge northeastern NASCAR convention for fans in the Pennsylvania area and all the surrounding areas, of course, and the Poconos being a beautiful area. Of course, Pocono Raceway has often been a fan favorite with locals. It sounded like a brilliant idea, and even fans like me who live hundreds, thousands of miles away from Pocono, Pennsylvania, I was still happy because it got both Poconos out of the way in the same weekend. I'm sorry. It still sounds like I'm just hating on Pocono. Pocono has its moments. The Xfinity race today was great. I still don't really like Pocono. It's still my least favorite track in the NASCAR schedule. So for fans like me, getting the 2 Pocono races on the same weekend so we don't have to come back a month and a half later and do the same thing over again, getting the race lengths shortened slightly, I was all in. I bought into it. I thought it was a great idea. But unfortunately, with obviously the pandemic we're all in the middle of and fans not being able to attend today's race or any of the races this weekend, it really is hard to gauge whether or not this weekend was a success. I will be curious to know what the TV ratings look like, even though those never tell the full story. And of course, today's race being delayed an hour, 2 hours, whatever it was, is certainly not going to be great and going to kind of add an asterisk to those numbers. But I will be curious to see. But ultimately, it's difficult to gauge whether or not this was a successful experiment, a successful weekend, because nobody was there to see it in person. So that is a bit disappointing, but I'd like to see NASCAR do this again next year. I really do want to see a track host a doubleheader weekend. I think Pocono makes a lot of sense to do it. Just what I saw these last 2 days, I think it would work great next year if they try to do it the same way with fans in attendance, hopefully. But it is disappointing that it wasn't able to happen here in 2020. I'm sure a lot of fans are disappointed about that. I'm disappointed about that, but of course, health and safety does come first. Now let's talk about today's race in general one last time. Today's race was certainly better, more entertaining, more interesting than yesterday's race. Neither race had a particularly dramatic finish. It was interesting, the final laps, seeing, when Hamlin was going to pit, what was the gap to Harvick going to look like when he pit. If they messed up on pit road, Harvick was likely going to leapfrog him, and then we'd have to see if Hamlin on better tires could run him down. There was a little bit of intrigue as far as the battle for the win is concerned in the final laps, but I don't know, it wasn't an edge of your seat type deal. Long green flag run at the end of this race combined with Pocono, where guys get strung out historically very quickly anyways, caused some pretty big gaps within the top 10. You didn't have a whole lot of battles on the track. Of course, you had, I think it was Alex Bowman and Clint Boyer beating and banging across the line for like 7th. That was pretty interesting, but aside from that, really close battle at the end there. Not a whole lot of battles for position in the final laps of this race, so that was certainly anticlimactic, but the first half of this race was wildly entertaining. The spins, the different pit strategies, which allowed for different leaders to kind of show themselves out front at different points. And just overall, I do think it was a little bit easier to pass, especially within the pack in today's race. And I think that probably had something to do with the fact that Trucks and Xfinity both raced on the track in the same groove, the same day, put hundreds of laps on the turns before the Cup cars even hit the track. So I do think there was an added bit of grip perhaps in some of the corners, which might have affected the handling and helped some drivers out, helped some guys make moves perhaps. But overall, I thought today track looked a little bit racier. We saw a lot more action in the first half of this race, guys taking risks, making mistakes, which is always entertaining to watch. So overall, I thought today's race was better than yesterday's race, but not dramatically. It's still Pocono. It's still just, Let's put this thing on the groovy gauge. Yesterday's race, I gave a 45%. Thought it was a little bit below average. Today's race, I'll go north of the border on this one. I'm going to give it a 55% on the groovy gauge, a slightly above average race. It was an okay race. For Pocono standards, I would say it was pretty decent. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you guys think down below. Give me your score on your own personal groovy gauges. I look forward to hearing what you guys think about today's race. Busy weekend. Now we have a week off before Indianapolis this weekend. Now remember guys, next weekend's race, both the Xfinity race on Saturday on the road course as well as the Cup race on Sunday will be broadcast on NBC. Big NBC. But Fox is not done this year because the next week at Kentucky, I believe, Fox and FS1, I think have one more race. I think they have that and then they have the All-Star race and then Fox is done. So kind of weird here. We're going to go to NBC and we're going to get next week, we're going to get the NBC crew back in action, see what they've got this year. Then we're coming back to Fox for a week or two. It's going to be weird, but I'm excited for Indianapolis next week and hope you guys are as well. We'll have a lot of videos to make and things to discuss in the days leading up to it, but thank you guys for watching. Subscribe if you are new. Follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Of course, a big thank you to my Patreon supporters. Couldn't do the show without all of your support. Speaking of upcoming races, I will be at the Bristol All-Star race, and that would not be possible without the support I get from each and every single one of you there. I'll be doing a video while I'm at the race. I'll show you guys what it looks like to go to a NASCAR race in the middle of a pandemic, so should be really interesting. I appreciate your support. Like I said, more videos coming later this week. Thank you all for the support. I will see you all again very, very soon. Have a great rest of your weekend.